hopefully my speech today will not bore you and ruin your fine afternoon tea. Okay? Dear Mr. and Mrs. Pearson, distinguished guests and friends, good afternoon. Some of you know me. My name is Peng Chun, in Chinese way, or Chun Peng in English way. A third-year DPhil in law at St. Catherine's College. It is my great honor and pleasure to be here to share with you, thus so eager early on, to share with you my own reflections of my experiences in Oxford as a Chinese student. It is no accident that Socrates and Confucius converge on the importance of self-reflection. The unexamined life is not worth living for as a human being. Each day I examine myself in three ways. While originally the former is a staunch defense of Socrates against the accusations of corrupting the youth and impiety, and the latter a praise and exaltation of the exemplary deeds of Confucius' favorite students, Zhengzi. Neither of them are merely normative claims. In fact, both Socrates and Confucius have noticed and demonstrated an unmistakable human feature: the unremitting quest to free oneself of the daily mundane to reflect on the very existence of one's own. My speech today constitutes a modest response to that calling of these great sages, East and West. It is modest in two senses. On one hand, by no means can my personal experience be representative of the 800 Chinese postgraduates and undergraduates in Oxford today. The sheer diversity in the burgeoning Chinese student body at Oxford is not to be reduced by me here in 10 minutes. On the other hand, meaningful though it may be, reflection is just a starting point of the probably never-ending journey of self-understanding, and it is no guarantee that I will have all the answers this afternoon. That said, there are at least 4 themes which I perceive are not only present in my own experience in Oxford, but also ring true to many of my fellow Oxford Chinese students. First of all is the question we long face since high school: generalization or specialization in our pursuit of knowledge. Those who are familiar with the Chinese secondary and higher education would know that the distinction and division between arts and sciences starts very early in Chinese high school and continues well into university. This may have better prepared us, the majority of Chinese graduates, to become specialists in a particular area and transition more smoothly from schools and universities to jobs and market. But undoubtedly lost is the Confucius teaching that the gentleman is not a tool, which can only be put to limited use. I'm not saying that West has done perfectly job to cling to the notion of Renaissance man in higher education, which indeed seems very odd and somewhat antiquated in the age of highly differentiated disciplines and strong emphasis on the marketability of the graduates. However, it has now become very clear to me after my 1-year master program and 3-year DPhil program that at least Oxford has not been so easily swayed by fashion after all these 800 years, and still holds dear Socrates' teaching that education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel, let alone to mold it in a set manner. We need not to repeat the cliché that the college and tutorial system in Oxford is refreshingly efficient in teaching students to think and learn freely without being shackled by disciplinary boundaries. Compared with the liberal arts education in American universities, Oxford is probably doing something very similar under the similarly highly specialized undergraduate degrees. Take law, for example. While it is not possible to read a minor in engineering, physics, or math alongside, law is not taught at Oxford merely as a closed vocation. On the contrary, students are introduced to the social-political contests and the philosophical underpinnings of the law from the very beginning. A pedagogy conducive to producing prudent and reflexive lawyers or lawyer statesmen. Tony Blair only get a second-class degree in Oxford. To me, Oxford represents the ideal of Chinese gentlemen. And it tells us that this ideal is not fatalistically lost in modern times. However, annoyingly, there is only so much time for me to explore, to enjoy, and to absorb this place that truly epitomizes the original meaning of the word universitas, the total and the whole. Secondly, when living in China, we're often told that we have to quickly adapt ourselves into British culture, into local life, which is also quite emphasized by the university. At one level, I think this is right and necessary because we're expected not to simply copy our past lifestyles in the British university. We have to mingle with foreign friends, speak and read English, and we have to participate more actively in classes. However, at another level, I often find this idea of adapting and blending as something very confusing, as the popular Chinese slogan that we should be geared to international standards. 与国际接轨. The problem here is, what is the international? For one reason or another, for many Chinese, it has been a long-standing view, widely held, that the West is the international. However, anyone from the West would tell you there is no such a West as homogeneous and static as many non-Westerners have imagined. Therefore, the effort of blending or adapting oneself into a mainstream British culture is not only disorientating and sometimes causing unnecessary worries on people who find it really difficult to really enjoy what is understood as British culture, for example, drinking coffee and going to pubs. I find it really difficult to really enjoy these two things. And also, this attempt to blend into British culture bears the risk of excluding us from the invaluable opportunities the multicultural and global town of Oxford presents us to establish our initial contexts, which are not available in many places in China, with Africans, Latin Americans, and Muslims and so on. More importantly, it might inhibit the cultural creativity and passion for constructive engagement in us as mere receiver, adapter, or blender. In fact, living overseas is a great chance for us as Chinese to re-examine and reinvigorate our own cultural repertoire and contribute back to the beautiful cultural dynamism in Oxford. This is why I directed the Spring Festival Gala last year in the town hall to an international audience of more than 700 with my colleagues from the Oxford Chinese Students and Scholars Association, a group of over 60 volunteers who are passionate to share Chinese culture. The third theme I feel common to all the Chinese students in Oxford is a political one. I have to be political. And the reason is simple. We come from so different a system that the minimum level of sensitivity to what's going on in British politics will regularly surprise, puzzle, and arouse curiosity in us. A popular impression in China nowadays is that the Chinese overseas students, especially those studying in the West, are overall more liberal in their political views. By liberal, it could mean different things, from being innovative and reformative to being disobedient and radical. And there's, in general, a expectation that sometimes the worry or fear that the new generation of overseas Chinese returnees could bring about political changes, just as what Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, Liu Shaoqi, and others did when they returned to China from Europe 100 years ago. Maybe this is too soon to tell, because I do see many Chinese returnees are more than eager to blend themselves seamlessly again into the local conditions of home country they left in the first place. But this is not the point I want to make here. It would be regretful if some close-distance observation of British political system only generates a blind confirmation of the old saying that the moon overseas is rounder than the moon at home, plus a simple-minded belief that all indigenous problems can be easily cured by imported medicines. Complicated problems must be approached with sophistication and patience. Clearly, this is not to say that complacency about the marvelous achievements in China in the past 3 decades is justified. That is not the case. Even when they do bestow on the current generation of Chinese overseas students like us, like me, a heightened sense of pride and confidence. Instead, as China sails into uncharted waters of development and reform, I see it now is the high time for young Chinese, including us, in Oxford, to embrace and engage politics in the sense that we start to seriously ponder, communicate, and debate about the outlook and prospect of a desirable collective life in China. Overseas students particularly have the vantage point to experience alternative ways of public life, which should not be treated as dogmas, but as reference points from which a better political China can be imagined and constructed. And this leads us to the final point. 100 years ago, a famous Chinese philosopher and educator, Hu Shi, a graduate of Cornell and Columbia himself, provocatively denounced Chinese students studying abroad. It is timely to recapture his argument when many of us in Oxford are facing the choice between going back home or not, or when to go back home. It is great shame on China when Chinese students have to go abroad to study, said Hu Shi, because it represents the tragic stagnation and backwardness of Chinese civilization and its defeat by the Western civilization. While we may not agree with the social Darwinist account of Hu Shi, his following warning still holds much water today. Hu Shi observed that to many Chinese at his time, studying abroad is just a way of getting degrees and stepping on a fast track to money and fame. An even worse example can be found in Fortress Besieged, a satirical novel by the renowned Oxonian Qian Zhongshu, where Fang Hongjian, the leading character of the book, who claimed back in China to have a degree from Europe that he never finished. These remarks, made a long time ago, still have to be taken very seriously, as such careerism and credentialism are far from extinct nowadays. In a world where calculation outweighs contemplation and ideas and skills are more valued than ideals and virtues, it is now all too easy to concentrate solely on how to make a living at the price of working out how to live and how to be a human, as Socrates and Confucius taught us. Studying abroad is not an end in and of itself, Hu Shi suggested. The purpose of studying abroad is to create new civilization for our own country. This, I think, is not some high-minded aspiration, but a central guiding principle to today's Chinese Oxonians when we make decisions about when and whether to return to China from overseas. This choice, informed by the principle, will also profoundly influence our attitude and behavior with regard to the last 3 points I've just made. If creation of new civilization for China is the goal and studying abroad the means, then the acquisition of specialized skills and human capital should not replace our pursuit of general knowledge and wisdom. Trying to blend into the mainstream culture cannot stop us from being sensitive to and fascinated by cultural diversity and treating our own traditions with respect and appreciation. A close-distance observation of British political system should neither leave us with mere surprises and puzzles, nor deprive us of the ability to make sound judgments about the advantages and disadvantages of a particular political system. Rather, it should spur us to go beyond thinking just about how to live as individuals to working out how we can live together in equality, freedom, and harmony. Several centuries ago, it was the custom that upper-class European young men embarked on what is called the Grand Tour to travel around Europe and expose themselves to the roots and legacies of Western civilization. Thanks to the economic growth and technological development of our time, men and women of ordinary backgrounds from China are now able to undertake the modern Grand Tour to places like Oxford. We might not have the leisureness of the European predecessors once had, as we were busy with exams, social activities, essays, and job seekings. But we're not as anxious as the Chinese predecessors were 100 years ago about the destiny of our nation during a time of invasion and separation. But today, we're in a unique position as the world comes closer and China is trying to embrace the world with dignity and grace. Socrates and Confucius never met each other, but they share opinions on many matters. It is for this prospect of mutual understanding that we reflect on our lives in Oxford and envisage a better China and world. Finally, on this occasion, I must particularly add that it is the extraordinary generosity of all the donors and trustees and volunteers of the China Oxford Scholarship Fund that opens this once-in-a-life opportunity and luxury to all of us. On behalf of my fellow COSF scholars, I sincerely express my gratitude to you and wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.